Right, but I think first we will just be sort of mapping in where the main edges are happening. So let's just put the background over there. This is the edge of the table basically. And it's going to be soft and subtle by the end, so we don't really need to be super precise at this point. We're going to sort of mass in all this information anyways. So we can maybe start like this. Divide the sort of wall in the background, let's say, and the table in the foreground as separate things. We can start with the thing that is higher up on this drawing, which means the background, so that after, because charcoal dust always sprinkles downwards, it's a good idea to work top to bottom if you're working vertically like I am here because of the filming reasons. Yeah, because it'll subtly change the values of everything underneath when you work. If you were to work from bottom to top, every single thing you work on top of it will darken the areas downwards a little bit. So it's just a sort of process thing at this point. I want to keep in mind. Again, we just want to go fully dark, and I'll just be quiet as I do this because we can then speed this up. You can start seeing how this is looking over here. It's a lot of charcoal dust that's just sprinkled on the paper. Also pay attention to how I approach the edges. I just try to be quite careful when I put in the darkest tone over here. I'm not sort of scrubbing all the way to the edge. I try to first kind of articulate it over here. And at this point we always are checking where the original drawing is, because yeah, things have moved already as we have scrubbed things in. These are soft edges now, so we don't really know where the original precise line was exactly. So we just want to try to adjust for that. Also, what we are getting is we are getting more accurate values here and value relationships between these things. And it's starting to get easier all the time judging these differences. Judging just pure line is way more difficult than judging accurate values. Okay, we have now filled in the darks of the box wall in the background. And now we want to start sort of working this charcoal in. And as I was saying, we want to have a gradation of some kind, so perhaps we want to figure out what the sort of endpoint of our gradation is here. So I'm just gonna work at this charcoal over here and see if I could lighten it a little bit in this top corner by just working it in. And as you can see, it leaves a fairly smooth finish when you do it like that. You don't have to sort of go into the background and dot pick a crazy amount. And using a large sponge like this, of course, lets you work on a bigger area at a time. So this is kind of quite efficient, really. I think most all of the background is going to be worked this way. Perhaps we'll go back and darken some things over on this corner, but this is more or less going to be our sort of main value for the background. And since this is a kind of a nice edge on this sponge and it's curved, you can sort of find a nice accurate smaller portion of it to work with the edges. Obviously it's not as accurate as the pencil or the sharpened charcoal stick, but this is definitely a very efficient way to approach working a background. And here, as you see, I'm trying to work away from the light portions of the skull, so we're always pulling the charcoal away from it. We can do side by side, of course, because it's not really going towards the lighter areas, but just try to have it. This process, we don't want to push the charcoal into the light areas. Perhaps we can use a bit more pressure over here and make it a little bit lighter, so we have more of a difference between here and there. I think that's already enough for a gradation. This is, you know, significantly lighter than this pure black charcoal value that we might be using over on here anyways, but I'll just work this charcoal a little bit more smooth over on this side. As we're working over here, we can notice some things that are sort of not really working in the articulation, like this portion over here was a little bit too high up. We can just slightly nudge the edge that way and it's already a bit better. Over here we're losing the sort of drawing a little bit because this shadow needs to be a little bit lighter over here, so just keep that in mind as we go towards wrapping up the background for this stage. I think we want to have it graded a little bit more towards the bottom. We don't mind if this sort of edge is very atmospheric and, as you know, lost and found over here. Over on this side it's all very crisp, but we're also designing, not just copying fully over here. The laser print over here allows us to sort of make some creative decisions. As we know, it's not very good a reference. We can make it nicer by applying our knowledge. Yeah, so this is starting to look kind of nice and smooth. Just lighten this portion a little bit as well. Still want it a little bit darker than the upper portions over here, but so there's a gradation both this way and this way. This is darker than this is darker than this. Perfect. I think ideally these would be more or less the same value, but probably this side should be a little bit darker as the light is coming more from the left side, sorry, the right side. I think it's time to really lock down these darker shadows over here made with the Rembrandt soft pastel. I think I'll just work this bottom area with the soft pastel, but for that I want to just secure a nice kind of straight line for the bottom, since it's going to be hard to move around. I'm going to have this as dark as the charcoal basically allows, and this as the darkest the Rembrandt soft pastel allows, so the difference between these two areas is going to be pretty minimal, like here, so it's going to appear soft even if we don't get everything perfectly right over here. But I think it's a good idea to really try to make sure the line is very straight. Yeah, my stick is a bit crooked as well, but I think that's, you know, good enough for this job. If you want to be super precise with your horizontals, you could set up with a spirit level, like make sure everything is actually horizontal, and then you can just compare it to whatever, you know, straights and like verticals, like the edge of the board and stuff like this, you could compare to. But then you would have to also set up the drawing exactly level as well. But since the drawing will be cropped and probably matted after it's done, you don't have to have it perfectly, you know, straight on the board, because you can always just set it vertically in the frame you're going to be doing. All right, I'm okay with the placement of this darker portion right now, so you can kind of go into the Rembrandt soft pastel at the edge over here, and even use the charcoal stick to blend a little bit into it. So what we wanted to do here is get sort of rid of the messy pastel, and then we can work on this area. That's what I wanted to do anyway, because I don't really enjoy as I said, I have a love-hate relationship with the soft pastel stuff in charcoal drawings. It looks great, but it's annoying to work with, so I think I'll just take a little break and wash my hands and so forth, and then we'll fill in this area with the darks. Okay, I think it's starting to look like a drawing now with the background in. I know these early stages can look very rough and not very inspiring, but this is a process that really works. So yeah, without further ado, let's just keep going. I think I want to map out the table front somewhat accurately before we want to continue. I'll just use a very dark. Actually, let's do that afterwards. I'm thinking I might lose it anyway, so we can just find it quite easily afterwards. So let's just actually map out this table value system over here. Just to mention this sort of area of the reflection, I kind of marked out for a little bit of extra information, but it's really just a placeholder. I'm not really interested in maintaining that in any way. So we'll be just toning all this pure black like we did for this background portion. Okay, well now we have the paper covered. Now we want to again think about the gradation we want to have. On this tabletop, we definitely want the gradation to be lighter in the front, darker in the back. That's usually how we want to go with this because it sort of makes it recede a little bit more. Sometimes in the background you want to have lighter values so the foreground pops more, but usually in the case of a table it recedes more if you make it darker in the background. And yeah, of course the same kind of light is happening, so we want to have it darker on the left and lighter on the right. So first I'm just kind of finding the smooth charcoal tone, which is basically just rubbing the charcoal in a little bit instead of going for the lighter values or anything like that. That's what I'm doing first with the sponge. It gets rid of the sort of excess charcoal on the paper and shows us what we have to work with. Also, this is a nice tone because we can always add a little bit more punch with just pure dark charcoal on top. I think we're going a little bit light over on this area here, so let's just work a little bit of that charcoal back in. I don't know if it's visible on camera, but you can actually use the charcoal stick to sort of lighten the darkest tones of the charcoal a little bit as well. Because when you sort of really go at it and apply the charcoal very, with a thick hand and you sort of push it in there, it creates a lot of that excess charcoal dust, which we use this to get rid of, and push into the grain. But also if you apply it and you have a very small area where this is clumsy, it might lighten the surrounding areas, which you don't really want. You can actually just use the charcoal stick to sort of gently take that excess dust away because you're not really applying the charcoal so much. You can just sort of kind of dust the surface, let's say, and it will lighten slightly. And that's a nice way you can use this charcoal stick. Okay, I think this is more or less the darkness we want to have on there, so let's just look for the lighter tones on this side. I think the table front will have a slight gradation as well, so just work a little bit of that as well. We're going to be a bit careful with this Rembrandt stuff. We don't want it too much on the sponge, so that when we go over this drawing with the sponge, we'll be applying a bit of that stuff we can't really erase very well, so try not to get too much of that on there. Just re-establish the back edge of the table a little bit over here. We'll go back into this with the variation stage, but yeah, let's just lighten this side of the table a little bit more over here. We don't need the movement to be extremely obvious with the tone, but we want there to be something at least, because it does add to the image. If everything is just flat values all around, then the image is going to look flat. It's not going to look like very atmospheric. Okay, I think this is actually enough for this stage. If you're wondering about this reflected light portion, it's going to be a part of the variations stage. We don't really mind that too much. I think the same goes for the penumbra kind of stuff happening around the edges of the darkest shadow of the skull. And yeah, this is basically the area that is fully in shadow under the skull that I use this black for. But there's kind of two light sources, as I described earlier. There's going to be some extra stuff around it that appears as a shadow, but it's kind of a penumbra because the other light source is usually hitting it. So yeah, I think we'll leave it at this. The value structure is looking now, it's looking good. and we have some range to, you know, darken things here, there. But the next thing will be the big form modeling, and we'll start to finally see the shape appearing for the skull.